Welcome back. You hear Goldberg. Today we'll be talking about why I left the left, or the left left me. This larger ecosystem of folks who always seem to provide great entertainment, particularly when mainstream, more relevant political movements go into decline. We see an upsurge of support and interest for these organisms on the internet.com. There are two primary strands that one can identify, the first being more intellectual in nature, and I would christen their rough founding around the time of the 2014 Bill Maher incidents. So Sam Harris is on there and he's going, obviously all religions have violence, but more recently it has been overwhelmingly attributable to Islam. And Ben Affleck went into SJW mode. He was like, man, you're a racist. You might as well join the National Guard. After that, there was this, oh, what happened to liberalism? What happened to controversial ideas? We have to be able to maintain civil standards of debate. We can't be devolving into this narcissistic, hoo-ha. And from that, you get Kermit Peterson, James Linsday, Stephen Punker, Ann Applebooty, Bari Weisse, the Weinstein dude from that Green Energy College, this so-called intellectual dark web. And they are more interesting to listen to, in fairness, than the other group we'll be discussing in just a moment. But they maintain this whole aura of, we're trying to defend true liberalism while the woke left is destroying it. On the flip side, you get the lower brow YouTube sphere, and I previously identified this around the 2015 timeframe. A lot of folks began to adopt classical liberal or centrist as their political philosophy, even though they were ostensibly just shilling for the Republican Party. So you have roaming millennial, just a cute Republican talking head for the most part, Sargon of Akkad, Hunter Avallone, Styx Hexenhammer. Now, some of you will go, oh yeah, but you wrote a book on centrism. Guilty as charged. Now, in my defense, I would say I had a slightly more profound understanding of issues and not just the stereotypical centrist who's just shilling for big business, or indeed these people who repeat Republican talking points and then claim that they're actually above the fray and more refined. I've noticed that they don't tend to be good at preempting things or seeing what's coming down the road. They're just being trend followers for the most part, getting their information from the RNC. Dave Rubin is a good example of this, and I read his book, Don't Burn This Book. Besides just some general cringe like, I want you to be staying up until 3 a.m. overdosing on facts. Dude, when you say stuff like that, we can tell that you have no intellectual curiosity whatsoever. You're not really imparting any idea. It's just this general meme of being above the fray, being a free thinker, as they call it. He also just will put out very unserious, poorly thought positions, such as, if I was in charge of the federal government, I would cut 1/3 of it overnight. I agree with that. The only people who'd be upset are lazy federal bureaucrats. I agree with that. Well, if you were to do such a thing, you would hemorrhage this country into a deep dish depression that would probably take at least a decade to come out of, because the government shores up such a large percentage of the economy, and indirectly an even broader expanse, that it's not even a realistic proposal. But it's tossed out by people who just want to get clicks and, oh wow, he's so bold. But it's not realistic. So, if we consider the whole principle of a classical liberal being somewhat of a restraint and defending structures, well, you're not going to say stuff like that unless you're just not terribly intelligent, which, I think the jury out on that one. Now, this matter of preemption really came to a head maybe a little less than 4 years back, because I remember fall of 2018, which that is 4 years, there was the ad apocalypse affecting mainly the Men Sent Their Own Way channels, because I can recall Sandman in my comment section crying about losing half of his ad revenue. Well, then early 2019, you had the Patreon scandal, and these folks who were ostensibly promoting free market, anti-regulation GOP talking points all of a sudden switched and said, we need to regulate the internet. It's not fair that these private companies are booting us off. And I'd done a video at the time, and I said, why can't you guys at least think? Because I'd been talking about this issue of economic terrorism the need for actual speech protections for people at jobs, their own views, what they joke about on the internet. And you're going to have to afford that to even content creators at a certain point. But of course, at one level, it's regulation they don't like. But when it starts affecting them, all of a sudden it's a crisis. So maybe somewhat facetiously, I was saying, why can't these dudes join the regular economy? Styx could work part-time in a vape shop. Sargon could be a university lecturer. Someone suggested that Tim Pool could do cuckold porn. Just an idea. In other words, they want to live this life on the internet that's supposedly just expressing their views, but when a private company doesn't like them, sees them as toxic or whatnot, they get upset. And it has become a larger issue, deplatforming from financial institutions. But once more, if you oppose regulation because of your freedom concepts, unless you want to build your whole internet, your own bank, all that stuff, you're going to have to deal with this problem where you need state intervention, realistically speaking, because those superstructures, corporations, are going to try to squash you if it's in their interests or they get enough pressure. This brings me to another aspect of the so-called intellectual branch of the true liberalism community. Douglas Murray, I know he's a neocon, but he associates with these characters. And about 10 or 12 years ago, I was pretty impressed by him because you didn't have that many folks who would talk about controversial issues. However, he came out with his book recently, The Madness of Crowds, and I haven't read it yet, but I saw an interview he was giving, and he's going,
I mean, what I'm saying is that we have gay rights and we have equality. Why are you guys trying to muck it up with all this woke nonsense?
Which is a classic example of not understanding your own relative position in history. This is similar to Victor Davis Hanson, who I respect, although I think he suffers from boomer bewilderment syndrome, where essentially you can't understand the world apart from how it was when you were growing up. So you have a much larger European descent population, and they believe, see, we didn't have issues with race. Well, yeah, a lot of people had to assimilate to that group if they wanted to be part of polite society. Or they think that the '64 Civil Rights Act solved the race problem. No, because they don't understand that the wokeists of today were the people agitating for the Civil Rights Act. Every generation is going to have that to some extent. And you're never going to have this perfect liberal plane that Douglas Murray wants to allude to. Even for himself, he thinks gay rights just sort of came about. No, there were gay people, whether you agree with that outcome or not, they were rioting, Stonewall, other places. Because if you just sit there and try to use the facts are on my side, to be truly liberal, you have to accept us. People are going to be sluggish. They're not going to go about with it. So maybe it'll happen, but it's going to take much longer, realistically. And especially when there is no real human tradition of mainstream openly gay people. Obviously, you can go back to the Greeks and Romans, but to what extent those men who might have played with younger dudes saw themselves as being gay is debatable. Certainly, most of them were not taking the submissive position that you would see folks such as Milo Yiannopoulos or maybe Yogi Zero Abs doing. It matters to understand your past and not just in this very vague, flowery manner, because otherwise you run the risk of just, again, you pursue idealism, but you don't understand that that idealism was at one point very much a revolutionary concept. But the next generation also is going to have its revolutionary concept or proposal. It's pretty much inevitable. Hence, when these characters appeal to a nostalgic past of the golden age of liberalism and respectful debate, it's just having affinity for a never was land. You can go back to the Alien and Sedition Act in the early days of the United States to see how civil and respectable people were. Look at the administration of Andrew Jackson. Look at before and after the Civil War, how people were behaving. Certainly, the 1960s and 70s were crazy. You had people setting off bombs, killing cops, rioting, smashing stuff. The idea that, yes, it's true, maybe politics overall were a little bit more civil. Now you have McCarthy and the way they treated him, they tried to destroy him. That is not exactly indicative of this very peaceful, regulated environment. Now, the media was perhaps a bit of an exception because you had only a few channels. It was controlled. You didn't have nationally broadcast talk radio. You didn't have Fox News and MSNBC. So there's going to be more standards from that. However, to pretend that we were there, we got there in the 80s or the 90s is not even true. The 80s, yeah, somewhat stable in a societal basis. The 90s, certainly not. You had a lot of anti-government activity going on. You certainly saw Bob Martinez in terms of cancel culture. Bob Martinez wanted to go after some historically butthurt rappers because of your obscenity laws in Florida. You had Tipper Gore getting involved with social conservatives because she wanted to ban pornography. Probably just got sick of seeing videos featuring Newt Gingrich and Al Gore. You had the Republicans versus Clinton. This is just, it's a feature. And even today, if you have read like Sam Harris, no, my God, Sam Francis, he talked about how these movements against inequality are really just individuals trying to make themselves part of the elite. So you could see this with Rachel Dolezal. She wanted to be black. Why? Because she saw that as a way to become privileged and powerful. Abraham X. Kendi is not a very intelligent guy, but he's smart enough to know he can use this whole movement, BLM, as a cash transfer, and he's probably a multimillionaire already. Much like that Robin DiAngelo woman, not very intelligent, but she was able to make a bunch of money. This is about power and financial transfers. That's what came out of a lot of the BLM. It was corporations making huge investments, creating these positions like a diversity officer, which is just going to go to a mediocre, talentless individual who says that they're oppressed, but they're going to make a six-figure salary. So recognize that it's not so much, well, we had perfect liberalism. No, you just have been able to operate in this relatively limited sphere, like firing line with William F. Buckley. But most of society has been at each other's throats to one extent or another, and it's going to continue. So it's great to have these discussions like you see in the picture here. I haven't actually listened to the podcast, but I want to. This was making the rounds because folks said it's a little hilarious when you see all the names. What's in common there? These are all cosmopolitan, wealthy types that just, oh, come on, can't we get back to idealism? I know they recently founded this University of Austin, or it's in progress, which is about free speech and confronting difficult ideas. And that's fine. You're not going to attack it. But even there, once you confront difficult ideas, you have to make decisions. And what happens if the other side, if you have 51% and you make this decision, the other side doesn't agree? You have conflict, and the other side may in fact become more radicalized in this environment with the internet and the media. So yeah, you can say you left the left or the left left you, but that's just kind of an egotistical position by someone who wants to feel that they're smarter than everyone else and they're more, I'm in a higher plane. But are you really? Or are you just not understanding how history progresses and how human beings tend to behave? There'll be some exceptions, but usually those exceptions are not the ones running society for pretty obvious reasons.